welcome to this edition of Simsbury School News. My name is Dominique Avery. Today, our focus is on the Simsbury School System budget for the next fiscal year. Don't let your eyes glaze over. The Simsbury School System's budget is incredibly important for both parents and students and for the public because what's in it relates directly to how much you pay in property taxes. My guests today understand the subject better than everyone else. Matt Curtis, the Town Superintendent of Schools, and Burke LeClaire, who's the Town Business Manager. Matt, welcome back.
It's great to be here.
And Burke, I think this is your first time.
I think so.
Welcome. When Matt presented his $67 million plus budget at the February 10th board meeting, and when the Board of Education approved it 2 weeks later, he said it includes a 2.47% increase over last year, about $1.6 million more. Matt, before we get into the details of the budget, which
Sure.
I know you want to share with the public, I think the question that the average person who doesn't have kids in their school wants to know is they keep hearing there's an enrollment decrease, but why is our budget going up? So can we start with that?
Sure. Seems like a simple question,
Right.
but there's a lot of complexity behind it. And one thing I think to frame a response there, it's important to go back to historical information. And Burke and I have actually analyzed, because it's a question that does come up a lot, analyzed historical data on both enrollment and budgets, as well as some statewide data. And there really isn't an absolute correspondence between a decline in enrollment and a budget that comes in at a net decrease over the prior year's budget. That being said, we are in a state of decline enrollment, as much of Connecticut is, so it's a factor that we deal with. And I will say it's the number one factor that's allowed us to be flexible in our budget planning. So what I mean by that is, every year when we roll forward our enrollment projections, we look at our class size guidelines and we talk about what are responsible reductions of staff that we can take, meaning teaching staff primarily, but still stay within our class size guidelines. So I guess an example of that is last year our salary increases when we were in the budget planning process were about, I believe, about $1.2 million, just rolling the organization forward. We projected a decline of about 76 students, and we were able to reduce close to 10 sections and basically offset that main driver of contractual increases.
10 sections meaning?
10 teaching positions.
Right, so meaning like at the elementary school drop
Maybe
of fourth
second
grade
or fourth grade, correct. So we go through that process each year. The way that enrollment looks this year, we're projected to go down a little bit over 100 students, about 50 at the elementary level, and then the following 50 split between the middle school level and the high school level. Just the way the projections rolled across class size guidelines, we can't absorb as many this year. We're going to reduce 3 sections at the elementary level this year, still be in good shape with class size, but we don't see as significant a decrease in the overall number of sections we can take. But as well as the reductions, you look for opportunities to innovate, you look for opportunities to push forward the district, and some of those services do cost money, so that's another offsetting factor. But in terms of comparable budgets, I believe we've put forward very fiscally responsible budgets in the last several years. Last year was the lowest budget, I believe, that we had on record in terms of an increase, and allowed 0% tax increase, which I know is another goal for, I believe, the Board of Finance members this year. And we'll work hard to do what we can to be a big part of that process.
Okay, so no, I didn't mention that I was going to ask this, but another thing that I hear from people who don't have children in school is they take a look at how many coaches you have at the high school and how many team sports are given, and they say,
right,
that seems like a huge amount of staff, and how can we afford that? So.
Athletics you're referring to? So we have a very comprehensive athletic program. We think it's an important part of creating a great school system and creating a vibrant high school. We do have a pay-to-participate model, and it funds about roughly half of the overall operational cost for our athletics. So we do offset some of that cost. In terms of comparable coaching, I mean, we look at where other districts are. I don't think we're an outlier in terms of the number of coaches we have for a particular sport, but we certainly do have a lot of offerings for our students. And it's one
now,
of the things.
Are those coaches all full-time? Are they mostly part-time, or?
Coaches are stipend positions. So they're, some teachers do coach in our district, but we have many coaches that come from outside the district, and their stipends that range from an assistant coaching position of maybe $2,500 to a head coaching position, sometimes $5,000 or $6,000.
So I think that's not clear to a lot of people when they see how many coaches you have on the list, when they look at the athletic department, that they're not full-time teachers.
Right, and the portion of funding that Pay for Play does cover, and I believe, Burke, if I get this right, about $175 per season, I think, is Pay for Play for our student athletes, are the coaching. So roughly $400 and some odd thousand in coaching stipends is covered by the Pay for Play revenue. The other operational costs our operating budget does cover.
Okay, so now we dove right in. Let's go back a
Sure.
little bit and talk about the budget process. And Burke, please jump in here. The two of us can talk a lot.
Okay.
You got to jump in.
Sure.
You've been here now, you told me 7 years or so you
Yes.
know what the budget process is. So maybe you could tell the public a little bit how it works and then
Sure.
what you do.
So for the Board of Ed process, in October, we start sending out all the budget forms to the various departments and principals within the district, and we focus on some of our building projects. We ask for some of that information back first. Generally, the budget forms are due around Thanksgiving time, and then there's a review process that happens out of the superintendent's office, business office, and we meet with each principal. Those are compiled into one total number, which then gets reviewed in anticipation of coming in January, February. Superintendent starts giving preliminary numbers, and then ultimately, after some Board of Ed workshops, has a superintendent's budget presentation, which is actually, I think, what you've seen most recently and you referenced earlier. Along that process, there is a chance for the public to hear. We kind of break it into program areas and try to explain what's behind areas of drivers within our budget, whether they be positive or negative cost impact. So that's generally how our process starts, and then it really, we're in this phase now where we then present, once the Board of Ed weighs in, as they did at the meeting of the 24th, I think it was, then we present to the Board of Finance, and then that typically is in March with an April public hearing process for both the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen. So you have a formal public hearing on the operating and the capital budget. So that's where voters can have the most airtime, so to speak. But at all of our Board of Ed meetings, we do have a public audience at the beginning and at the end.
So can I just interrupt you? So any member of the public, not a parent, not with no student, and they could come to the board meetings and stand up and say, "I think you have too many coaches. I think your enrollment's going down. You want to." Can they just come? Would
They can
you welcome
certainly
that?
they can certainly come and express their feelings or ask a question. And if they don't feel comfortable doing that on camera in front of the TV audience, they can email the superintendent, the business office, or one of their Board of Ed members, and we're very interested in hearing the public's thoughts.
Let's just, before we go on, let's and I'm sure Matt has something to add too. Let's underline the dates of that Board of Finance public hearing is at the high school on April.
Yes, April 8th is. We have that scheduled, and I
Right.
believe the time is 7:30, and that's at the amphitheater.
Right. And then the town-wide vote on the budget?
Townwide vote, I believe, is tentatively set for May 5th. I'm not sure that the Board of Selectmen has
Is
formally set that.
Right. I think that's a tentative date, though. Yeah. So, so that's the process. So when you go to the building, do the principals have new ideas that they want to, or ways of saving money, or what do they actually come to you with?
So that's a great question. I think, the reality of the economic decline in about 2008, coupled with the fact everybody was looking to be as prudent as they could with costs, we stopped having some of the innovative conversations I think that principals would desire to have along the way about the vision of their school, the vision of their programming, and where we would want to go with that. We really tried to bring that back into the fold this year, and we started to talk about 5-year outlooks, both from a facility standpoint, which Burke really worked on with the principals, and a programmatic standpoint. You know, enrollment is something we can project 5 years out. So we can start to have, I believe, a little bit better feel on how to manage some of these conversations and outlooks long term. I mean, this is an annual process that we spend an awful lot of time on. And I think that we need to, and the Board of Finance, I believe, sees this the same way, need to put some collective energy into creating a process that allows us to get at some of these larger data points, like enrollment, like staffing, to provide an outlook to, I don't want to say avoid surprises in the future or spikes in the budget, but allow people to know what the parameters are. But yeah, the principals are a big voice in this. We meet with each of the principals, our central office staff, for several hours, go through line item by line item what their concerns are, what their desires are. We talk about staffing, certainly, and program and curriculum and professional development as the major areas. They really have an opportunity to advocate for what they feel is important. They know their buildings best, they know their students best and their parents best. And then, as Burke said, we have a review process to try to frame those requests in the reality of the time we're in, and some of the goals of our Board of Ed and some of the goals of the Board of Finance to come up with what we feel is a budget that moves the district forward, a district that has a long-standing, as you know, being here as a resident, reputation for excellence and innovation, to keep that moving, but do so in a really responsible way. And I believe this budget represents that.
Before we went on the air, we talked a little bit about NerdWallet honor that they gave Simsbury, or it's sort of a finance website that
Right.
that they determined that Simsbury was the #1 town in the state for sort of young families because of the schools, the affordability. I forget what the other things were. Well, some
Sure.
sort of very nice things, but schools that was one of the major things. So
It's a wonderful community, I think, with a lot of desirable traits, and I think everybody that works on the budget recognizes that the schools are an important piece of that puzzle, and that even though times we want to be as responsible as we can, we don't want to impact our programs in a negative way, because I think particular when you look at Simsbury High School in comparison to other competing comprehensive high schools, I think it's the breadth of the programming, it's the uniqueness of some of the opportunities that we've talked about on this show that separate Simsbury High School from other high-achieving and high-performing places.
So now, I recall that at the February 10th board meeting, you did say something about there were places that you could cut if the Board of Finance came back and said, this budget's too high.
Right.
You mentioned technology, athletics, and equipment.
Okay.
But you didn't cut them.
Right. So one of the things when we were at our last Board of Education meeting, our board asked that I come back and present to them what it would look like to take my 2.47% increase, take it down to a 1.7, to start to have some conversation, if we had to, of what some of these reductions would look like. One of our challenges now is with, I believe, 6 years of sub 2% budgets. You go through an exercise similar to this every year, and you look to the non-personnel areas. I mean, you look to personnel attrition when you can, as far as keeping class size where it needs to be, but you look for other areas that you feel won't impact programming. So we've been to a lot of those buckets. So the challenge is getting more difficult for us. So the list I did present to the Board of Ed is a list that includes quite a bit of personnel. And the kind of philosophy that our administration took on that, knowing we had to create that document for conversation, was keep those personnel positions away from the most immediate impact of the classroom teacher, meaning we were not going to go right to class size and significantly increase class size in your primary grades. Look at some of these other positions that we have that we feel are very positive for our district. You know, they're curriculum support positions, they're instructional coaches, people that really
You have
support
a lot
teachers.
of that here in Simsbury.
We have a real nice
Right.
support network, and I think that's one of the reasons why we do as well as we do, and we have the outstanding staff that we have. But we had to make some tough decisions that if push came to shove, that's where we would come first. I think there are, as we move through a process annually, we gain more information. We've received some favorable information relative to OPEB that we may talk about a little bit. We do have some grant opportunities in technology that may be able to alleviate some operating pressures. So we continue as we work through to look for areas of flexibility in the number, and that can go right up to, I believe we did that right up until the public hearing last year when we went from a 1.5 to a 1 because we got some favorable insurance information. So we do have a reduction list out there. I don't want to say that that immediately means if we need to move, it will look like that list looks. I think it's important to note that we will always try to find efficiencies and as information evolves, places that we can be more cost effective if we can.
Yeah, fortunately, as recently as yesterday, the town and Board of Ed received some positive news on our one of our actuarially defined payments that has to do with something called OPEB, which stands for Other Post-Employment Benefits. So it's a factor for both town and Board of Ed budgets, and we're going to be able to share some positive news with the boards at the meetings next week. So that was something that just happened this week, as Matt mentioned. There is time between now and the public hearings, and we are looking hard at some areas such as energy efficiency projects. We're going to be talking with our board about that Tuesday, and it's something that I've discussed previously with the Board of Finance going back to last fall. And also we're going to be looking at the area of health insurance, where we have seen savings, and we're assuming a certain level of savings in the superintendent's budget, and we're going to see if there's any more benefit that we can take from the positive self-insurance experience that the town has had.
That reminds me of a town resident who said to me recently, he was sort of so outraged at you guys, you and the town budget being so pleased with the insurance savings you got last year.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, why are they patting themselves on the back? They should have done that long ago. So he was really, you know, you should have been saving the taxpayers that much money.
Sure.
So
Well, collective bargaining in the public sector is a little different
Right.
than working in a private sector, where you can just dictate that all of your employees will move at a following
Right.
date. And so we'd like to think that through collective bargaining, not only have we been able to achieve savings in the carrier consolidation. Last year we moved from 2 carriers to 1, which was the bulk of the savings, but also through collective bargaining we've seen considerable cost shifts where the bargaining units have taken more of the ownership for whether it's their pension to contribute towards their pension or to the cost of health coverage, also adding plans to allow us to achieve some of the savings that we're starting to see this year, because we've added a 3rd plan option with a high deductible health plan. So those are areas that take a little more time in the public sector, but I think we're really pleased. The Board of Ed set these goals about 3 years ago.
Right.
That one of the things we had to do, fastest growing area of our budget over time, was insurance and pension, and we've actually turned that trend in a positive direction. So I think it's just a yes. We shared the goal that we need to focus on saving monies in those areas, but it doesn't happen without a lot of steps in the public process.
thank you. So one of the things we haven't talked about that I know is a big budget item, and that is special education.
Right.
Simsbury is known for having excellent special education, which then gives you, then more people move in for that
Sure.
reason. What is the status of that? How big is that budget? The state has been talking for years about trying to improve how they fund it, but nothing's happened.
So a couple things that are interesting, and we really started to, we talk a lot about our declining enrollment trend.
Right.
So our corresponding enrollment trend for special education is very different. So over the last 5 years, we've seen a decline of roughly a little short of 500 students. Our special ed population has stayed exactly flat. So, in terms of program improvements, and when you're thinking about planning and creating supports that students require, this is where over the past couple years we've seen requests. Some of them staffing. We have some staffing requests in this budget, and they really are to focus on what we're talking about is really crucial for students and staff to be supported, and those are transitional years. So when students leave that elementary school experience, they move to middle school, do we have the appropriate staffing and caseload numbers to really manage the instruction effectively, support the students as effectively as we can? We felt like we're a little short-staffed there. And then when we transition from middle school to the high school level, and you start to talk about really career readiness and developing some skills for some students outside of the schools, life skills, so to speak, and we have a job coach position in there that would go to work sites with students. We have 2 full-time positions spread across K-12, really, in terms of FTE, a half-time position at the elementary level at Terrifield School, a full-time position at the middle school, and then a half-time position at the high school. So collectively, I mean, doesn't sound like a lot, but that's about $234,000 in staffing requests, to your point, at a time when enrollment's going down. So, why would you request more staffing when enrollment's going down, where there are some unique needs that we'll need to talk, we've talked to our board about, certainly, that we'll need to talk to the Board of Finance about. The other is appropriately funding what we call outplacement costs. So over time, as many districts have, you've seen an increase in the number of students that need to be educated outside of the school system. Those tuitions in some cases can be costly. We've historically utilized grant funding, an IDEA federal grant, it's a special education grant, as kind of a flex zone to be able to respond to the any shortfall or any unanticipated expense we have in that area. And that's how we managed that cost last year, and we had to close a gap. So we're requesting some additional funding to fund outplacement, and it's a significant amount of money. It's $250,000. So those two together are actually the largest drivers.
And that can be a very limited number of children, right?
It could be, depending on the needs, absolutely.
Let me ask you, you say that sort of enrollment's gone down, but special education enrollment stayed flat.
Yeah.
Does that mean that there's still an influx of people, or does that, what?
Yeah, I mean, my point there is just, you don't see the same corresponding decline across all the different areas, which kind of logically leads to you're not going to eliminate the same kinds of resources in terms of right sizing. So I believe 5 years ago we had 540 special ed students. Right now we have 541. Mm-hmm. So to your point, we're proud of some of the programs we have in-house. I think some of those programs really allow us to educate our students. Ready, Set, Go program at the elementary level, which serves the needs of autistic children. And we need to continue to build those programs at the secondary level and hopefully alleviate some of the outplacement costs in the end.
With the special ed picture, I think it's different in that you can't just look at the average student cost. You have the X number of students, and that's more of a simple formula. But with special education, the nature of the disability of those same number of students, the complexity that we've created a special program, Ready, Set, Go, for K-6, and as Matt mentioned earlier, now these students are aging up into the middle school, so we don't have a specialized program there. We've been short on staffing at that level. We have some programs at the high school level that we're looking to expand also. So those are some of the issues where it's not just about the simple numbers of students. It's what do you have to do to provide the appropriate education for them.
It's complicated. All right, we have 2 minutes left.
Oh.
You have an opportunity
Say
now.
it, huh?
Right, you have an opportunity to say something that I didn't ask you about. You want to crow about how well students are doing? You want to tell us something that you want the public to know?
Well, I think, to step back and, we don't want to act like we're patting ourselves on the back, but I've always said I feel very fortunate to lead a district where parents are so involved, teachers are so passionate, and students are so ready to learn. And we have some new data points that we've talked about publicly this year that we're just really excited about. The College Board is now tracking our students to see how successful they are in college. And the recent data came back that students from Simsbury High School are more successful percentage-wise in terms of graduation rates than just about any other town in the state of Connecticut and tops in Hartford County right now. So I mean, that's an exciting new data point, because when we talk about college and career readiness, we never had the data to really see
Right.
what that looks like. We've also received some data back from an international exam called the PISA exam, which is the exam that's often referenced when we talk about the demise of education in America. And we had a random sampling of Simsbury High School students that were outperformed by nobody across all the content areas. So it's really, I think, a testament to our community, to the programs, and to our kids. So
On that note, I'm going to stop you. We have
All right.
now run out of time. I'd like to thank everyone here at SCTV behind the scenes for their help in getting the show on the air. Thanks especially to my guests, Matt Curtis and Burke LeClaire. And finally, thank you for joining us. If you missed any portion of this show, you can always find it on our website at simsburytv.org, where you can also get updates on new shows and the show schedule for all our channels, Comcast 5, 95, and 96, and Frontier's UVerse Channel 99. You can also always like us on Facebook. I'm Dominique Avery. See you next time for the Simsbury School News.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.